In the honors chemistry lab at 7 in the morning when everyone else was still asleep. Not in the same orbit as the most untouchable boy in the entire city. But Zoe Hadley didn't wait for permission. She never had. She was the daughter of a middle school math teacher and a labor and delivery nurse, two people who spent their whole lives in service of other people's futures. They raised Zoe in a modest home in Compton, California, with a kitchen table that doubled as a homework desk and a rule that was ironclad: whatever you want, you earn it. So every morning, Zoe was up before the sun. Every morning, she packed her textbooks into a worn canvas backpack. Every morning, she rode the public transit bus 45 minutes across town to Pacific Crest, where the other students arrived in chauffeur-driven SUVs and talked about their ski trips in Aspen like they were describing trips to the grocery store. Zoe didn't resent any of it. She was too busy studying. She had one goal, one dream, one singular obsession: become a pediatric neurosurgeon. Heal the children that other doctors had given up on. She had decided this at 13 years old when her baby cousin was diagnosed with a rare brain condition, and the surgeon who walked into that waiting room, a black woman in a white coat, had looked at their terrified family and said, "Asterisk, I've got her." Asterisk. That image never left Zoe. That woman was her North Star. So every book, every exam, every early morning bus ride was a step toward that white coat. She didn't have time for distractions. She especially didn't have time for Ethan Kang. If you went to Pacific Crest Academy, you knew who Ethan Kang was before you ever met him. You knew his name because it was on the new science wing. You knew his face because it was quietly stunning in the way that made people forget what they were saying mid-sentence. You knew his story because everyone whispered it: son of Chairman David Kang, heir to the most powerful medical and biotech dynasty in Southern California. A man who had turned 3 hospitals and a pharmaceutical company into a multi-billion-dollar empire that stretched from Los Angeles to Seoul. Ethan had grown up watching his father treat life like a chessboard. Every relationship was a move. Every person was a piece. And from the day he was old enough to hold a fork at a formal dinner, it was made clear to him quietly, consistently, with the kind of love that had conditions attached to it, that his life had already been planned. He would attend Pacific Crest. He would go to Seoul National University. He would take his place at the right hand of the chairman. He would marry someone appropriate. He would continue the legacy. The problem was that Ethan Kang had never once, in 17 years, felt real. He had attended every gala, every board dinner, every charity auction. He had shaken hands with politicians and smiled for photographs and said all the right things. But there was a glass wall between him and everything around him. He could see the world perfectly. He just couldn't feel it. Until the morning he walked into the honors chemistry lab and found a girl who didn't even look up. He had arrived early, unusual for him, because his father had some visiting executives staying at the house and the noise had driven him out. He pushed open the lab door expecting an empty room and instead found Zoe Hadley bent over a titration setup, pencil tucked behind her ear, lips moving slightly as she counted drops. He stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds. She still didn't look up. He set his bag down. She didn't flinch. He pulled out a chair. She didn't acknowledge him. He opened his own notebook, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan Kang smiled, a real one, not the polished version he'd been practicing since he was 8. Because there was something almost absurd about the fact that a girl was in this lab at 7 in the morning. Her work for a few minutes. And then he saw it. "You're off by 0.2 milliliters. Zoe's hand froze mid-drop. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes, dark, sharp, unimpressed, traveled from his hands to his face, taking quiet inventory. "Excuse me. Your titration. The end point, you're past it. The color shifted 3 drops ago." A long silence. She looked back at her solution. She looked at her notes. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who had just been told they had spinach in their teeth at a job interview, annoyed, but unable to argue. "Thank you," she said, with the flat, controlled dignity of someone who absolutely did not want to say thank you. He almost laughed. "Ethan, I know who you are," she said, and turned back to her work. That was it. No performance. No flutter. No, oh my gosh, Ethan Kang is talking to me. Just a correction acknowledged, a name received, and back to business. He sat there for the next hour in the most comfortable silence of his life. Word got around, the way word always got around at Pacific Crest. Ashley Whitmore heard about it by second period. Ashley was the kind of girl who had been beautiful and wealthy for so long that she had mistaken those two things for a personality. She wore her hair in perfect auburn waves and her clothes like armor, strategically chosen, aggressively tasteful. Her family's real estate empire had done business with Chairman Kang for years, and in Ashley's carefully arranged vision of her future, that connection had a very specific shape. Ethan, in a tuxedo, at the altar, completing the picture. She had been patient. She had been strategic. She had attended every function, every gala, every dinner where their families intersected, cultivating the kind of presence that said, "I belong here," without ever having to say it out loud. And now some girl from Compton, who rode the bus, was sitting in the chemistry lab with him at 7 in the morning like it was nothing. Ashley found Zoe at her locker before lunch. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She was far too calculated for that. She simply leaned against the adjacent locker with the casual authority of someone who owned everything in her field of vision, and she spoke in a voice low enough to sound generous, cruel enough to land like a slap. "I've seen girls like you before," she said. "Smart. Ambitious. You think that's enough?" Zoe opened her locker. Didn't answer. "Here's what you don't understand," Ashley continued, tilting her head. "His world has rules. And you're not in them. His parents have expectations. His father has plans, and girls who don't fit the profile don't get kept, they get replaced." Quietly. She paused for effect. "Honestly, I'm doing you a favor. Save yourself the embarrassment." Zoe pulled out her AP biology textbook, closed her locker, looked at Ashley directly for the first time, not with anger, not with tears, but with the calm, unblinking steadiness of someone who had learned a long time ago not to give her energy to things that weren't worth it. "Thank you for your concern," she said, and walked away. If you're already feeling the weight of the story, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. You're going to want to be here when the rest of this unfolds. Asterisk, asterisk. The gala was held aboard the Monarch, a luxury ship docked in the harbor, one of Chairman Kang's signature events for the medical elite of Southern California. 600 guests. 10-course dinner. A fundraiser that was really, when you stripped away the chandeliers and the canapes, a performance of power. A reminder of who was at the top. Ashley arrived in a gold gown, positioned at the entrance like a chess piece placed with intention. Zoe arrived in a midnight blue dress she had found at a consignment shop in Inglewood for $42. She had altered it herself. She looked extraordinary. Ethan found her near the railing, looking out at the city lights reflected on the water, and something about seeing her there, standing alone in a room full of people performing for each other, still utterly unbothered, made him feel, for the third time since he'd met her, something warm and completely unfamiliar. He stood next to her. "You came," he said. "You asked me to," she said. "I keep my word." He laughed, genuine, unguarded. People nearby turned their heads at the sound, because it was the kind of laugh nobody had heard from Ethan Kang in a very long time. The evening unfolded. And then Chairman David Kang approached. He was an imposing man, not physically large, but carrying the particular gravity of someone who had never in his adult life walked into a room where he wasn't the most powerful person present. Silver at his temples. Eyes that evaluated everything in seconds. He looked at Zoe the way a jeweler looks at a stone of uncertain origin. "So you're the girl my son has been spending his time with," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment. "Zoe Hadley," she said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." He took her hand. Firm. Brief. His eyes didn't leave her face. "Your parents," he said. "What do they do?" "My mother is a labor and delivery nurse," Zoe said. "My father teaches 8th grade math. They're both very good at what they do." A pause. "And your ambitions?" "Pediatric neurosurgery," she said, without a flicker of hesitation. "The brain is the most complex system we know of. I want to work on the hardest cases." The ones people have been told are hopeless. Another pause. Longer. Bold, he said, not a compliment, not a dismissal. A data point. Ethan, standing just behind his father, caught Zoe's eye. She gave him the faintest hint of a smile. What happened next, Zoe would not discover until much later. Behind closed doors, in the chairman's private study, over tea that had gone cold, David Kong and his wife, Margaret, made a calculation. The girl was intelligent. She was composed. She was, Margaret admitted reluctantly, impressive in ways that were difficult to dismiss. But she came from nothing. No pedigree. No legacy. No connections. No social infrastructure that could benefit the family. And more importantly, she was becoming real to Ethan. Not a phase. Not a novelty. Something real. And that was the problem. They could forbid it outright. But they both knew their son. He was quiet, but he was iron. Forbid something and he would plant his feet. Push him and he'd push back harder. They had learned that lesson already. So Margaret said what she always said when a direct approach would create resistance: find the door they'll walk through willingly. 3 days later, through a carefully routed chain of intermediaries, a foundation, an academic board, a very discreet phone call, Chairman Kong secured something extraordinary: a full 4-year medical scholarship to Oxford University in England. Covered tuition, housing, stipends, research funding. Worth, in total, somewhere north of $400,000. It would be delivered anonymously. No fingerprints. Just an opportunity too good to refuse. A cage with a golden door. The dinner at the King estate was elegant and suffocating in equal measure. The table was long. The silverware was heavy. Margaret Kong had prepared a traditional Korean spread alongside a Western menu, a gesture that was diplomatic enough to seem welcoming, calculated enough to establish hierarchy. Zoe ate with quiet confidence, navigated the silverware, answered questions graciously, and listened more than she spoke. And then, over dessert, the chairman cleared his throat. "Zoe," he said, in the warm voice he used when he wanted something, "I happened to learn of something recently that I thought might interest you. A very prestigious scholarship has opened up, Oxford Medical School. Full ride. For years. Exceptional research opportunities." He paused. For the right candidate, it would be life-changing. The table went very quiet. Zoe set down her spoon. She looked at Chairman Kong. She looked at Margaret. She looked, for just a moment, at Ethan, who had gone very still in the way he went still when he was furious, and choosing not to show it. "That's very interesting," Zoe said softly. "Thank you for sharing that." Later, on the estate balcony, the city spread out below them like a circuit board, Ethan stood beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then, "If you take it." "Ethan. I'm just saying. If you take it, I follow you. London, Oxford, wherever. He doesn't own the ground I walk on." Zoe looked at him. "You know what this is," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know exactly what it is," he said. "And I need you to know that whatever you decide, I'm not part of the condition. I don't come attached to any deal." She looked out at the city for a long time. Down there, somewhere, her parents were finishing their shifts. Her mother was probably handing a new baby to its exhausted, tearful, overjoyed mother. Her father was probably at his kitchen table grading papers, red pen in hand. She thought about everything that had brought her to this balcony. The bus rides. The library. The lab at 7 in the morning. Every sacrifice her parents made, every hour she had poured into books and notes and dreams, not for a scholarship. Not for a building with someone else's name on it. For something real. "I know what I'm going to do," she said quietly. "Right here, right now, this is the moment this story turns. If your heart is in your throat, you're in the right place. Drop a comment below that says, 'I'm still watching, let's see who's riding this out till the end.' ****. Graduation day at Pacific Crest Academy was the kind of event that required its own logistics team. It was held outdoors, on the manicured lawn facing the harbor, with 300 white chairs arranged in perfect rows and a stage dressed in the school's colors. The audience was full of people who measured success in zip codes and portfolio values: parents, grandparents, board members, Local politicians, the city's quietly powerful elite, all gathered to watch their children receive the credential that confirmed what they already believed, that their children belonged at the top. Zoe Hadley walked across the stage as valedictorian. She had written her speech 3 times. The first version was gracious and measured, the kind of speech that would have made her counselor proud. The second version said a little more. The third version, the one she was holding now, said everything. She stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the crowd, found her mother in the 4th row, in her Sunday best, pressing a hand to her mouth. Found her father next to her, hands folded, watching with the quiet pride of a man who had driven a used Honda Civic 45 minutes each way to work every day for 20 years so his daughter could be standing exactly where she was standing. And then she found Chairman Kong, seated near the aisle, silver cufflinks catching the sun, watching her with the composed authority of a man who believed he had already won. She looked at him for just a moment. Then she began. "When I was 13 years old," she said, "a surgeon walked into a waiting room and told my family she was going to save my cousin's life. She was calm. She was certain. She was extraordinary. And I decided, that night, that I was going to spend my life becoming that for someone else." She paused. "This week, I was offered a path to Oxford University. A full scholarship. The kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often." The crowd shifted. You could feel the attention sharpen, the particular alertness of people who recognize a moment unfolding. "And I turned it down." A murmur. "Not because Oxford isn't extraordinary. It is. But because I realized something, a dream that someone else is using as a bargaining chip is no longer your dream. It's their investment. And I don't belong to anyone's portfolio." She looked up. Clear. Steady. "I was raised by a nurse and a teacher. 2 people who went to work every single day not for applause, not for recognition, but because they believed in the dignity of service. They taught me that the greatest things you will ever build in this life, you build them yourself. With your own hands. On your own terms." She smiled, that free smile. "And that's exactly what I intend to do." The silence afterward lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then her parents were on their feet. Then, slowly and probably, so was half the crowd. Chairman Kong did not stand. He sat very still, his expression unreadable, watching the girl from Compton receive a standing ovation from the room he had spent 30 years trying to impress. He found them after the ceremony. Not Zoe. Ethan. He crossed the lawn in long strides, his wife a step behind him, his face carrying the particular compression of a man who had been publicly embarrassed and was handling it very, very badly. "She made a spectacle of this family," he said, low and controlled. "In front of everyone. That scholarship cost." "Don't." Ethan's voice was quiet. The quiet was more dangerous than anger. "Ethan, don't finish that sentence." A beat. Chairman Kong changed tactics. His voice dropped into something more intimate, more dangerous. "I have given you everything. Everything. And you are prepared to throw it away for a girl you have known for less than a year." "I'm not throwing anything away," Ethan said. "I'm choosing." "Then choose wisely," the chairman said. "Because if you walk away from this family tonight, from our name, our business, our legacy, you walk away with nothing. No trust fund. No apartment. No car. No support. Nothing. You will be on your own." The lawn was quiet around them. People had stepped back, sensing the electricity. Ethan looked at his father for a long moment. Then he turned to Zoe. She was standing a few feet away with her parents, her mother's arm around her, watching him with those dark, quiet, unreadable eyes. He walked to her. He took her hand, laced his fingers through hers, right there in front of his father, in front of the crowd, in front of the whole elaborate performance of his family's power. "Keep the hospitals," he said, without looking back. "Keep the trust fund. Keep all of it." He looked at Zoe. "You still got that bus pass? I think I might need a ride." And Zoe Hadley laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a performance. A real one, the full, unguarded kind that made her eyes crinkle and her shoulders shake. And Ethan Kong, heir to nothing and everything that actually mattered, smiled like a man who had just set down something very heavy. This is the most intense moment of the entire video, and if this hit you somewhere deep, we want to know. Subscribe to the channel right now, because this is the kind of story we tell every single week. And keep watching, because the ending is the part nobody sees coming. They didn't disappear quietly. They didn't move to a small town and fade into obscurity. They didn't collapse under the weight of what they'd walked away from. They didn't prove anyone right. They worked. Ethan got a job at a legal aid clinic in Long Beach the summer after graduation, fielding phone calls, filing paperwork, doing the kind of unglamorous work that nobody tells you about when they sell you the dream of law school. He enrolled in night classes. He studied on the bus. He studied in the break room. He studied the way Zoe had always studied, with the total commitment of someone who has no fallback plan. Zoe worked 2 jobs through the summer, a lab assistant position at a community college and weekend shifts at a medical records facility, and studied for every scholarship exam she could find. She applied for 43 of them. She won 11. It was enough. 2.5 years after walking off that stage in a $42 consignment dress, Zoe Hadley received a full academic scholarship to Harvard Medical School. 6 months later, Ethan Kong received his acceptance to Harvard Law. They celebrated with takeout on the floor of their small apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a place that smelled like old radiators and ambition because they couldn't afford a restaurant and because it was one of the best nights of either of their lives. The years passed the way good years do, fast and full. Zoe became the pediatric neurosurgeon she had decided to become at 13 years old. She worked on cases that other surgeons had described as inoperable. She became known, quietly at first and then loudly, for the kind of calm certainty that a surgeon walks in with when they have no intention of losing. She had a waiting list. She had papers and journals. She had a reputation. She had that white coat. Ethan built a practice in healthcare law, specializing in patient advocacy and medical equity, fighting for the same communities he and Zoe had grown up in, making sure the hospitals and insurance companies and pharmaceutical conglomerates couldn't quietly steamroll people who didn't have the power to fight back. He was very, very good at it. They were a team in every sense of the word. Not because they had set out to be a power couple, that had never been the goal, but because they had built the same values into the same foundation, and those foundations held. In Seoul, word traveled the way word always travels, in powerful circles, slowly, then all at once. Chairman David Kong followed his son's career the way a man watches something he doesn't fully understand, with suspicion at first, then reluctant attention, then something quietly close to awe. He had expected Ethan to struggle, to come back, to need him. Instead, he watched his son become someone. Not the someone he had planned. A different someone. A better one. At a board meeting 2 years after Ethan's graduation from Harvard Law, a colleague, who didn't know whose son he was talking about, mentioned a healthcare attorney in Los Angeles who had just won a landmark case against a major hospital system on behalf of uninsured pediatric patients. Brilliant young man, the colleague said. Kong, I think his name was. The chairman said nothing, but he carried it home with him. And that night, alone in his study, David Kong sat with a cup of tea and looked out at the city he had spent his whole life building, and quietly, with the dignity of a man who would never say it out loud to anyone, admitted to himself what he had been too proud to see before. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated them. And in doing so, he had missed the thing that actually mattered. 8 years after graduation, Pacific Crest Academy held its first major alumni reunion. Zoe and Ethan drove down from Los Angeles in a used car that had seen better days, both of them in jeans, no performance, no announcement. They walked in the way they walked everywhere, together, unhurried, at ease. The reunion was held in the same building where Zoe had once opened her locker, while Ashley Whitmore delivered her quiet warning. They found Ashley near the appetizer table. She looked different in the way that years of unhappiness wear on a person, not in the face particularly, but in something behind the eyes. There had been relationships that unraveled. There had been ventures that didn't land. There had been a long stretch where the life she'd assumed was owed to her had simply refused to arrive. She saw them before they saw her. She saw them, fingers linked, relaxed, talking quietly between themselves, and something shifted across her face. Something that might have been regret if she were the kind of person who reached for that word. Zoe saw her. She walked over. "Ashley," she said warmly. "It's good to see you." Ashley blinked. Composed herself. "Zoe, you look wonderful." "Thank you. So do you." A short conversation. Polite. Genuine on Zoe's end in the way that only the truly secure can be genuine, without performance, without score settling, without the need to establish anything. When they walked away, Ethan leaned close and said, "Lo, you okay?" Zoe thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I really am." Because there was no victory to perform. No point to prove. The life they were living, the one they had built from nothing, from bus passes and lab corrections and a speech on a sunlit stage, was its own proof. It didn't need an audience. They stood together at the edge of the old courtyard where, 8 years earlier, Ethan had stepped out of an SUV to find the only girl in the world who didn't look up when he walked in. The sun was going down over Long Beach. Below them, somewhere, a bus was running its route. "Think about how close it almost didn't happen," Ethan said. Zoe leaned her head against his shoulder. "It happened," she said. "That's the only part that matters." He reached into his jacket pocket. Came out with something small. She looked down. A ring. Simple. Beautiful. Real. Her breath caught. "I've been carrying that around for 3 months trying to find the right moment," he said. "And I realized the right moment is just wherever you are." She looked up at him. That boy from the chemistry lab, who had corrected her titration by 0.2 milliliters and changed the entire direction of her life. That boy who had stood in front of his father's empire and chosen a bus pass instead. "Yes," she said. Simply. Completely. Without hesitation. And somewhere across the Pacific, in a boardroom that smelled like imported leather and consequence, Chairman David Kong closed a file, capped his pen, and said something to his board that no one expected. "The greatest mistake I ever made in business," he said carefully, "was assuming that the only assets worth investing in were the ones I could see coming." A long pause. "The ones that build themselves, those are the ones that last." Nobody in the room knew who he was talking about. But he did. Because here is the truth that this story is really about. You cannot bribe someone out of their destiny. You can build walls. You can set traps. You can offer golden doors to empty rooms. You can leverage your wealth and your name and your network and your very expensive chessboard. But some people, the ones who ride the bus at 5 in the morning, the ones who correct their own mistakes and keep moving, the ones who stand at a podium in front of the most powerful room in the city and tell the truth. Those people are not pieces on anyone else's board. They are the board. And when they find each other, when two people decide that what they're building together is worth more than everything being offered to keep them apart, there is no amount of money in the world that wins that negotiation. Zoe Hadley knew that. She had known it since she was 13 years old, watching a surgeon in a white coat walk into a waiting room and say, "I've got her." She got herself. And everything else, the love, the future, the freedom she built. And that is the story of Zoe and Ethan. Two kids from different worlds who chose each other over everything and built something no one could take away. If this story moved you, and I believe it did, we need 3 things from you right now. First, hit that like button. You watched all of this. You earned it. So did they. Second, leave a comment. Tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the speech? The bus pass? The ring at sunset? Let us know down below. Third, subscribe. We tell stories like this every single week, stories about love, dignity, sacrifice, and the people who refuse to be written off. You don't want to miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next one.